Hey, welcome back to Prankster. We're reading the final story now. The final story of the main Fazbear Frights, whatever this is now. Um, and I'm hoping it's going to end with a bang, but I guess we'll have to see. This is Find Player 2, Part 1. You're so gross. Amy turned her head away from her friend. I can't even look at you. Mary Jo's rat-a-tat-tat laugh spewed across the table at Amy, along with some of her partially chewed pizza. She'd been showing off how she could flip a mouthful of pizza on her tongue, just like they flip the whole pizzas in the oven. Who did that? It was disgusting. Without looking at it, Amy flicked away whatever had just landed on her forearm. She felt a wadded-up napkin hit her on the cheek. She sighed and turned back toward Mary Jo, careful to keep her eyes squinted in case Mary Jo was doing something else that was gross. "Why do you do stuff like that?" Amy asked. Mary Jo laughed again. "Because I can." Amy shook her head. How was it she'd been friends with this freak of nature for 8 years? Instead of being at home, curled up in her cozy room on her frilly pink window seat, reading the book her dad had bought her on his latest business trip, Amy sat across from Mary Jo in one of the red booths at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a half-eaten slice on the table between them. On the stage to their right, the pizzeria's animatronic performers, Freddy, the brown bear in the top hat, Bonnie the blue rabbit with the red bow tie, and Chica the yellow chick with the bib and the mouthy pink cupcake with googly eyes, were performing a toe-tapping rock song. The music was loud, but it still didn't drown out all the other noise in the restaurant. Okay, so this story takes place in Freddy's, for once. That's not normal anymore. Cool, I like that. The place was filled with animated conversation, laughter, happy squeals, utensils clinking against plates, and the pings and beeps and warbles from the games in the arcade just off the dining room. Although Amy liked the pizza, she didn't enjoy the ruckus chaos at Freddy's. She was a quiet girl, more content by herself than in crowds. Mary Jo, on the other hand, loved the craziness at Freddy's. She especially loved the music. At the moment, she was bobbing in her seat, right on beat with the music. Her frizzy brown hair had a different syncopated rhythm, bouncing off the offbeat. Mary Jo's hair, like her herself, always had a mind of its own, even when she was 3. When Amy had worn her blonde hair in pigtails, a braid, or a ponytail in preschool, like nearly all the other 3-year-old girls, Mary Jo never wanted to restrain her hair. She refused to let her mother control it with hair ties or braids or clips. She wanted it to fly out from her head like a lion's mane, wild and free, the way she wanted to be. And even back then, Mary Jo usually got what she wanted. Mary Jo and Amy were exact opposites. That's why they had been friends for so long, according to Amy's mom. They balanced each other out. Like right now. Amy was frowning, her face screwed up in protest at the noise and her weirdo friend's antics. Mary Jo was smiling widely, flashing her big mouthful of equally big teeth, now stained with sauce from the pizza. Yuck. She had sauce on her cheeks, too. Amy didn't bother to tell Mary Jo about the sauce. She wouldn't care. She might even go as far as to put sauce on the other side, too, and call it war paint. Whatever was normal was often the opposite of what Mary Jo wanted to do. She took another big plate of pizza, chewing with her mouth open. Amy made a face and pushed away the remains of the pizza in front of her. She'd lost her appetite, which was never as big as Mary Jo's anyway. "Are you done?" Mary Jo asked. Amy nodded. She didn't bother to explain why. "You need to eat more. You're bony," Mary Jo said. "So what? You're pudgy. You're always saying not everyone should be alike." Mary Jo swallowed her pizza, thank goodness, and picked up her soda to take a long suck through the straw. The clackety suctioning sound that indicated the bottom of the glass prompted her to pull back and scowl at the ice cubes that remained. "You're right, I'm wrong," Mary Jo said. "Okay, so if you're done, do you want to go and play in the hiding maze?" Amy shrugged and nodded. She still would rather be home reading, but she'd predicted Mary Jo would want to play in the hiding maze, so she'd brought a new book with her. It was tucked into the cute fanny pack her mom had bought her, along with strawberry-flavored lip gloss, her hairbrush, and some money. The hiding maze, short for Freddy's hiding maze, was a fancy hide-and-seek game played in a network of tunnels that ran between the walls enclosing Freddy's main areas, dining, arcade, kitchen, restroom, storage, stage, etc., and the exterior walls of the restaurant. It was pretty cool, actually. The hiding places were little cubbyholes with doors. The doors had tiny windows you could peer out of when you were hiding, probably so kids didn't feel trapped. The windows were made of that special glass that feels like it looks like through a window on one side and a mirror on the other. If you were a seeker, you could only see the mirrors on the cubbyholes as you walked down the tunnel, while hiders could look out without being spotted. Even though the game and its cubbyholes sometimes made Amy feel a little nervous, the hidey holes were cool for a different reason. They appealed to Amy's natural desire to be by herself. Only 2 people played the hiding maze at a time, so when you were in the game tunnels, you were far from all the craziness in the rest of the restaurant. When she and Mary Jo played, Amy always preferred being the hider, and Mary Jo loved being the seeker. Mary Jo was never happy sitting still. She liked to be doing something, and she loved a challenge. Amy assumed this was why school was so hard for her friend. Mary Jo was bored out of her mind in the classroom. She was constantly getting caught doodling in the margins of her notebook instead of taking notes while the teacher was talking. But really, it's more than doodling, Amy thought. Mary Jo didn't draw actual things, like recognizable things. She made patterns and shapes was all, but they were super cool patterns and shapes. Amy had seen stuff like it in an art museum her mom took her to once. She had tried to tell Mary Jo she had talent, but Mary Jo shook it off. Nah, I'm not talented, I'm just a pain in the butt with a good friend. Amy had hugged Mary Jo then, feeling a big wave of affection for the girl who often made her want to scream. The hiding maze was a great way for both girls to do the things they liked, together. Sort of. It worked because Amy had figured out a way to cheat, in reverse. Because of the way she played, Amy got some quiet time, and Mary Jo got a challenge. "So, are you going to sit there, or are you coming?" Mary Jo asked. Amy blinked and looked up at Mary Jo, who was dancing around at the end of their booth, shrugging into her backpack and doing odd gyrations to the music at the same time. "Oh, sorry, I was thinking." "You do too much of that." Mary Jo laughed loudly and punched Amy in the arm. Amy squealed and rubbed her arm. There was another thing Mary Jo was good at, throwing an unintentionally hard punch. When Amy and Mary Jo had met at age 3, they'd both been small for their age. Other than that, they hadn't had much in common, and they still didn't. Amy was light-haired and pale-skinned and had small features with bright blue eyes. Mary Jo had that brown frizzy hair and large mouth, along with caramel-colored skin, big brown eyes, and wide nose. As they grew up, their size similarity changed too. Amy remained small, but Mary Jo shot up and out. She was 6 inches taller than Amy now, and, as Amy had reminded her, she was pudgy. She was also a lot stronger than Amy, both physically and in all other ways, actually. Sometimes Amy thought about not being friends with Mary Jo anymore. They had so little in common. But Amy would never have the heart to dump Mary Jo as a friend. Mary Jo had gone through enough dumping. Mary Jo's parents were really young when they got married and had their daughter. Too young, according to Amy's mom. Mary Jo's dad left his wife and daughter when Mary Jo was just a baby. Mary Jo's mom had tried to take care of her daughter after that, but she gave up when Mary Jo was 5. One day, she just left, and Mary Jo ended up in foster care. That's where she still was, now on her 5th foster family. Amy had asked her parents to take in Mary Jo on more than one occasion, but her mom said they didn't have the resources to handle Amy's friend. She didn't mean money, even though she was just a kid. Amy knew her family had plenty of money. Amy's mom meant time and patience. Amy's parents both worked important jobs. Her dad was a high-level manager, which meant her dad told other people what to do. Her mom was a marketing consultant, which meant her mom advised other people on how to sell their brands and stuff. Amy's parents had a lot to do, and a lot of people depending on them. If Amy had to be honest, though, she was sometimes glad Mary Jo had come to live with them. She loved Mary Jo, but she could be annoying, displays of partially chewed food being just one good example. Mary Jo could be really yucky when she wanted to be. Sometimes Amy wondered if that was a byproduct of her tough upbringing. It was like she wanted people to look at her, whether for a good reason or a bad reason. "Well," Mary Jo said, "do I need to punch you again?" "What? Oh, no, don't punch me again. I swear I'll stop thinking. Let's go play in the hiding maze." Mary Jo grinned and took Amy's arm. Skipping, she began pulling Amy toward the arcade. All Amy could do was follow, scowling at Mary Jo's back as she yanked her between the tables and around other kids. Mary Jo's overstuffed backpack made it look like she had a hump on her shoulders. According to Amy's mom, Mary Jo would have a real hump if she kept carrying her backpack around everywhere. The way she hunches her shoulders to carry all that weight, Amy's mom often said, it's not good for her. Amy had told Mary Jo about what her mom had said, but Mary Jo had laughed it off. So what if I end up with a hunchback like some old witch? She curled forward, squinted her eyes, put her hands into claw shapes, and cackled like a wicked witch. That'd be fine. No one would mess with me if I looked like that. You're weird, Amy had said. You're not, Mary Jo had responded. I think not being weird is worse. Amy knew why Mary Jo carried her bulging pack with her wherever she went. One day, when she was throwing a fit over something one of the foster kids had done, Mary Jo had shown Amy everything in her pack. Her favorite clothes, a picture of her mom, her hug-worn teddy bear, her pillow, pens, crayons, a couple of books, PJs, slippers, a big detangling hairbrush Amy didn't think Mary Jo ever used, her toothbrush, her zipper purse filled with a few dollars and some coins, a few battered candy bars, a bag of peanuts, and her diary. I can leave whenever I want, Mary Jo had said. See, I have what I need. Where would you go? Amy had asked. Mary Jo had shrugged. I don't have to plan everything, do I? I'll just go. Gazing at Mary Jo's backpack now, Amy wondered whether it had all the same stuff in it. It had been a year, at least, since Mary Jo had showed Amy what was in the pack. Had she added anything? Had she taken anything away? Amy let her friend drag her all the way through Freddy's packed dining room full of big round tables surrounded by laughing families. At least they hadn't been sitting out here. There was one thing she and Mary Jo agreed on. They preferred the booths to the tables. The booths were separated from one another by low dividers painted with cartoon-like animals of the animatronic characters. It made each booth seem like its own little room. Mary Jo kept pulling Amy, and Amy went along until they were inside the edge of the arcade. There, however, Amy faltered. Then she stopped. Someone, a man, had caught her eye. Amy, what are you doing? Mary Jo asked. Actually, she shouted. She had to shout to be heard over all the screams and dings and sirens in the game area. But when she shouted, the man Amy had spotted turned to look at the girls. Amy flushed and stood on her tiptoes so she could whisper in Mary Jo's ear. There's something creepy about that man over there. Mary Jo immediately looked around. What man? She asked in yet another shout. Amy winced when the man shifted his attention fully to Mary Jo. Shh, Amy hissed. Come on. She tugged on Mary Jo's arm. But Mary Jo pulled away. She took 2 steps toward the man, put her hands on her hips, and yelled, It's not polite to stare, creep. Mary Jo, Amy whispered intensely. Amy felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up from her skin as she watched the man, a tall and skinny guy with long greasy hair, give Mary Jo the kind of grin Amy's mother would have called impertinent. The guy's dark, almost black eyes were narrowed with unnerving intensity. He had yellowed and crooked teeth, and his face reminded Amy of one of those scary wrinkled Halloween masks. All this guy needed was some blood, dripping from his mouth, and he could have been the bad guy in a horror movie. Wearing stained, baggy clothes, he looked like a street person. What was he doing in Freddy's? Come on, Amy urged Mary Jo. Mary Jo wouldn't budge. She jutted out her lower jaw in an act of defiance and squinted at the man. You want a piece of me, creep? Amy rolled her eyes and groaned. Mary Jo watched too many cop shows. Amy tried struggling on Mary Jo again. Mary Jo suddenly laughed, and Amy dropped her arm. What? Amy began. Then she saw that the man was gone. Mary Jo spun in a circle and did a little boxing motion. Nobody messes with me or my friend, she yelled out. The other kids in the arcade looked over at her for a few seconds. Some of the kids gave her dirty looks. Then all the kids returned to their games. Mary Jo took Amy's arm. Stick with me. I'll protect you from the creepazoids. Amy smiled, but then shivered. She glanced toward where the man had been standing. He was gone, Amy hoped. How about we do something different today? Mary Jo asked, as they approached the beige grate that covered the rainbow-colored entrance to the hiding maze game. Amy loved that the entrance to the hiding maze game didn't look like the entrance to a game. It just looked like a heater vent cover or something surrounded by an arched rainbow. She knew that most parents didn't even know the game existed. The rainbow looked like a wall decoration, not the start of a game. Amy and Mary Jo had only learned about the game a year or so before. By then, they'd been coming to Freddy's for several years. One day, a little blonde kid named Albie, who Amy and Mary Jo only knew from Freddy's, came over and said, You've been coming here enough. We think you're ready. Ready for what? Mary Jo had asked. Albie had just grinned and told them to follow him. He led them back here to this grate surrounded by the rainbow. Mary Jo had threatened to beat him up if he was going to do something mean to them. He just rolled his eyes and opened the grate. Then he'd pointed at a digital game display, which was on the left wall of a small, low box-shaped chamber just beyond the grate. With walls of knotted pine and a red floor covered with a multicolored rag rug, the tiny space looked like an elf's living room. It was just big enough for a couple of kids, crawling or sitting down. The room contained the grate-covered entrance on one wall, the game console and framed pictures of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica on another wall, and a red vinyl mini-sofa, big enough for 2 kids to sit against a third wall. The wall behind the sofa was painted with a mural of thick evergreen trees dripping with moss. The scene reflected the look of the game itself. On the 4th wall, opposite the grate, a round opening revealed a long, dim tunnel. Above the display in the elfin living room, where the players' names were hidden, the name of the game was printed in big block letters, Freddy's Hiding Maze Hide-and-Seek Game. Next to the game's name, an image of Freddy had a speech bubble. The rules of the game were printed inside that bubble. Amy thought it was cool that they were now part of something that seemed like a secret club. So did Mary Jo. Mary Jo liked it even more than Amy did, probably because she didn't get to be part of anything else, secret or not. What do you want to do differently? Amy asked, now that she dropped to her knees, pulled open the grate, and crawled through the opening behind it. She gave a half-second's thought to the cute raspberry-colored capri pants she was wearing. They'd be filthy when they were done with the game. She shouldn't have worn them today, but she couldn't help herself. Amy could hear the scuffles and grunts of Mary Jo following her. Mary Jo didn't care about her clothes. She was usually dressed as she was today, in stained jeans and a too-tight t-shirt. Once she was inside the little game entrance room, Amy looked at the console. The display would have the players' names on it, if a game was in progress. It would be blank if no one was in the game. 2 names were on the display, and Freddy's voice announced, "Welcome to Freddy's Hiding Maze Hide-and-Seek game. Please wait, a game is currently in progress." Amy crawled over and sat at one end of the red sofa. Mary Jo shifted and planted her butt in the other end. She had to bend forward because of her backpack. Turning to Amy, Mary Jo said, "I want to be player 2 first today." "What?" Amy rotated to stare at her friend. "I'm always player 2 first. I hide first, you seek first. That's how we always do it." "I know. Boring, right? We need to mix it up," Mary Jo said. Amy opened her mouth to object, mostly because she didn't like the way Mary Jo bossed her around. But really, did it matter that much? She shrugged. "Whatever." Mary Jo crossed her arms and closed her eyes, looking pleased with herself. Amy cocked her head and studied Mary Jo. She looked the same way Amy's cat looked when she sat in a sunbeam with her eyes closed. Amy always thought her cat looked stuck up when she did that. Mary Jo did too. Amy opened her mouth to ask Mary Jo why she always had to get her way, but then Freddy's voice announced, "Ready for new player 1 and player 2. Please input player names." When Amy was very little, she thought Freddy was actually inside the games that had his voice. Now that she understood that they were pre-programmed, pre-recorded voices, she always laughed at herself when she heard the game's audio. Mary Jo opened her eyes and pointed toward the console. "Go on, you're player 1. Amy glared at Mary Jo. "Okay, Mrs. Bossy Pants." Mary Jo gave Amy a huge grin. Amy snorted. "You're incorrigible." She just learned that word the week before. It fit Mary Jo perfectly. She really couldn't be corrected or improved. She was always going to be just as she was now. Mary Jo grinned even wider and blew a kiss to Amy. "Love you too." She pointed at the game's console again. "Go on. If you can find me in 3 minutes, I promise we'll spend the rest of the day doing what you want to do, after we play both rounds. I want to read my new book." Mary Jo stuck her finger in her mouth and made a gagging sound. Then she laughed at the look Amy gave her. "Fine. We'll go to your house and sit in your room. You can read, and I guess I'll draw if you find me in 3 minutes. And if I don't, we'll keep doing what I want to do." Amy sighed. "Fine." She crawled over, knelt in front of the game console, and typed in her name as Player 1 and Mary Jo's name as Player 2. As soon as she finished with Mary Jo's name, the Freddy voice said, "Player 2, please find your hiding place." Amy turned, stuck her tongue out at her bright-eyed, wild-haired friend, then returned to the little sofa. That was where the seeker was supposed to wait while the hider went to hide. Mary Jo flashed Amy with a huge smile and waved before disappearing into the main tunnel. "Good luck finding me," she called out. Amy didn't bother to answer. She just crossed her arms and sighed. She was tempted to get out her book, but if Mary Jo chose a spot quickly, Amy would waste precious minutes putting her book away. How long does it take her to put a book away? So she just sat and waited. She counted to see how long Mary Jo took to hide. Amy had just whispered 107 when Freddy's voice announced, "Player 2 has chosen a hiding spot. Player 1, find Player 2. Go!" Amy scooted off the sofa and started crawling through the main tunnel as fast as she could go. Fast wasn't really that fast in the hiding maze. All the tunnels in the hiding maze game were sloped. Some went up and some went down. None were perfectly level. Most of the tunnels curved this way and that. They were constricting and confining, with ceilings that often felt like they were pressing downward, trying to bury you alive. Only the main tunnel was straight, but it went uphill. Amy couldn't go as fast as she wanted to. The hiding maze was designed so that only half the hiding cubbyholes were open at the start of the game. When Player 2 found a hiding place, the door of that cubbyhole and all the open cubbyhole doors were closed. The doors that had been closed then opened, so Amy didn't have to search the entire maze, but just searching the closed doors would take long enough. Every tunnel in the maze was lined with the rough, spongy material, colored to look like the bark of evergreen trees, like the ones in the mural. They weren't real trees, of course, but they felt like it. They smelled like it, too. The whole hiding maze had a musty, earthy smell that always made Amy feel like she was crawling around in dirt burrows. The floor of the tunnels even looked like dirt, brown and uneven and kind of squishy like wet mud. Amy didn't know what the tunnels were made of, not mud, obviously, because she never got muddy. Interspersed between the trees, the big fake gray boulders created nooks and crannies for the hiding cubbyholes. Each hiding cubbyhole was covered with an arched wood door that looked like the entrance to an elf's or fairy's home. The little viewing one-way windows were round insets in the upper part of the doors. From the tops of the tunnels, fake tree branches tickled the top of Amy's head as she passed under them. They were loaded with fine moss that looked like silky green hair, which made them hang low and heavy. Occasionally, one strand would flutter over her face and make her feel like she was going to sneeze. Amy thought the whole hiding maze was kind of spooky, especially because the trees weren't the only thing lining the walls. Here and there, little plump gray worm-like things wiggled as you went by. They had googly eyes that rolled around. Amy tried not to look at them. In a few places, the mechanical eyes peered out between the tree trunks. Those eyes rolled around too, and they bothered Amy more than the worms because she imagined the eyes belonged to awful creatures lurking behind the trees. The tunnels were so dark that they were terrifying to be in, though. Strings of rope lights that looked like tree roots lined the bottom and top edges of the tunnels and surrounded each cubbyhole. But it was still kind of an eerie place. The game had its own soundtrack, which played on loop from a dinged-up old cassette tape that was warping in places. The track was mostly rainforest sounds, some of them soothing, like the constant patter of steady downpour, spattering the trees and forest floor. But every now and then other sounds would cut in, creepy screeches that could have been monkeys or maybe jaguars. When you were hiding, you felt kind of safe, sheltered from the noise, secure in your chosen cubbyhole. When you were seeking, the soundtrack put you on edge. The growls and shrieks never failed to give Amy goosebumps. Everything about the hiding maze felt old to Amy. She wasn't sure how long Freddy's had been here, but the hiding maze seemed ancient. In addition to the game's worn soundtrack, a lot of the tree bark and moss were breaking off, and the cubbyhole doors were scratched and warped. It felt to Amy like the hiding maze had been a great big deal at one point, but now it was mostly forgotten, so it wasn't being maintained. Even though the floors of the hiding maze tunnels weren't made of real dirt, they were always dirty, covered with scuff marks and food stains and littered with debris left behind by other seekers. She was pretty sure the Freddy employees never cleaned back here. Amy saw some confetti sprinkled along the edges of the passageway she crawled through and a deflated balloon lying outside one of the cubbyhole doors. Those had been here for months now. Some kid had lost a striped sock with a hole in the toe just a few feet into the main tunnel. Amy had lost something in the maze a few months before. Mary Jo had made her a red beaded friendship bracelet, and Amy had noticed it was missing from her wrist after one of their games in the hiding maze. She thought Mary Jo would be upset about the loss, but Mary Jo had just shrugged and said, "It's probably in one of the cubbyholes. We'll find it one of these days." They hadn't found it yet. You weren't supposed to bring food into the hiding maze, but most kids didn't follow that rule. Right now, for example, the tunnel smelled strongly of chocolate, and Amy had to crawl around a few fresh, glistening brown stains on the side of one of the boulders. Some kid must have brought chocolate cake in here. He, she guessed it was a boy, had even left a broken red plastic fork behind. As she neared the end of the main tunnel's first leg, she spied the other game console, which displayed her name as Player 1 and Mary Jo's name as Player 2. And a running timer showed how long it had been since the game started. Staring at the bright timer against the relative dark of the tunnel, Amy's head started to hurt. She noticed she was grinding her teeth, something she did when she was upset. That always made her head hurt. She concentrated on relaxing her teeth, but the ache remained. She was tired of always going along with whatever Mary Jo wanted. Amy reached a closed cubbyhole door and lifted its round metal handle. It clicked when she lifted it. Peering into the empty cubbyhole, of course she wouldn't find Mary Jo that easily, Amy regretted their 3-minute bargain. There was no way she was going to win that fast. Amy wasn't sure how long it would take to crawl up and down every meandering tunnel in the hiding maze. She'd never done that, but she knew it would take way longer than 3 minutes. The hiding maze rules allowed one player to search for Player 2 for as long as it took to find Player 2's hiding spot. However, the game also allowed Player 1 to give up if he or she got tired of looking. Win or lose, Player 1 and Player 2 switched places after the first round of play. The truth was that Amy had never even tried to find Mary Jo in the hiding maze before. She liked to be the hider first because she could get her book out and read while she did. Mary Jo never gave up, and sometimes it took her a long time to find Amy. Amy read until Mary Jo found her. Once they switched places for round 2 and Mary Jo was hidden, Amy would usually just sit in the tunnel and read some more. Mary Jo thought Amy was searching for her, but Amy actually just was hanging out. After a little while, she'd press the give up button on the game console, and all the cubbyhole doors would open. At that point, Amy would put her book away and meet Mary Jo outside the game, congratulating her on another win. Going first meant Amy couldn't pull off this trick as easily, and taking the bet meant she couldn't do it at all. Now frustrated and tired with her growing headache, Amy was tempted to just sit in the tunnel and read for her remaining minutes before pressing give up. But she really didn't want to hang around Freddy's all afternoon, so for once she tried to find her friend. Wriggling through the few twists and turns off the main corridor, Amy threw open cubbyhole doors right and left. Grumbling to herself about how she was ruining her pretty pants, she'd crawled through the grape juice in the first 30 seconds. She started getting more and more annoyed with every door she opened. Of course, Mary Jo wasn't behind any of the doors, and Amy's head was hurting again. "This is stupid," Amy whined out loud. Deciding that she was wasting precious time opening doors because Mary Jo was probably on the backside of the game, Amy put her head down and just crawled at super speed toward that area. She'd find Mary Jo there for sure. To get to the back of the game, Amy had to pass the end of the main corridor. As she did, she glanced toward the entrance to see if anyone was waiting to play. It looked like someone was. The grate was missing, and the entrance was open. Amy started to crawl on, but then she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. Turning, she nearly choked on her sharp inhale. The man she'd seen in the arcade was peering through the open entrance, and he was looking right at her. Frozen in mid-crawl, Amy could do nothing but stare at the man, who gazed back at her with the same wide grin he'd given Mary Jo in the arcade. The grin dropped Amy's body temperature so fast that she felt like she'd just been flash frozen. Every hair on her body bristled. Amy wasn't sure how long she and the man looked at each other. It felt like forever, but it was probably just a second or two. She didn't seem to be able to move. But when the man stuck his head farther in through the game entrance, a movement that coincided with one particularly loud screech from the game's soundtrack, her body decided it was time to get going. Amy let out a little squeal and started crawling as fast as she could toward the exit. That was it. She'd had enough. Forget finding Mary Jo. Amy just wanted out of the hiding maze. Amy panted heavily and scrabbled noisily as she crawled through the first several feet away from the main tunnel, but then she slowed and did her best to control her breathing. Trembling, she looked over her shoulder to see if the man was catching up to her. She didn't see him, but she heard him. At least she thought she did. Even over the rainforest soundtrack, she couldn't make out a few scuffles and thumps that seemed to be coming from the main tunnel. Forcing herself not to scream in terror, Amy put her head down and started crawling again. By the time Amy was near the game exit, she knew more than 3 minutes had passed. It didn't matter what she did next. Mary Jo would be telling Amy what to do for the rest of the day. As if that was her biggest problem. The truth was that Amy no longer cared what she did later today. She just wanted to get out of the game and away from the big creepy guy. Seeing that creep again was the last straw. Amy didn't want to be anywhere near Freddy. She wanted to go home. Twisting toward the game's exit, which also exited to the back alley of the building itself, Amy checked over her shoulder to be sure the creepy guy hadn't followed her. She didn't see anything. No one was behind her. Amy pushed the heavy wooden door open. When the fresh air hit her, she breathed in and then exhaled in relief. As she climbed out into the bright afternoon sun, though, she paused and looked back at the tunnel. Mary Jo was still in there. What if the creepy guy found her? Amy chewed her lower lip. She frowned. Finally, she shook her head. No, he wouldn't find Mary Jo. She was hidden. It was much more likely he would have found Amy, who was out in the tunnels. Later, Amy would explain to Mary Jo why she left. Mary Jo would understand. Stringy hair falling over his dark, evil gaze, the creepy man reaches out and pulls on the cubbyhole handle. The door opens slowly, relentlessly, eventually revealing what it always reveals. Mary Jo, wide-eyed and pale. Launching herself at the man, Mary Jo screams and scratches at his bare arms. She's a fighter, and she's not going to let him take her easily. But Mary Jo is no match for the man's strength. He clamps her arms to her sides and drags her from the cubbyhole as Mary Jo screams what she always screams. "Amy! Amy, where are you? Help! Why did you leave me?" Amy's eyes shot open. She rubbed them with her trembling hands as she reoriented herself to wakefulness. Taking a ragged breath, she realized where she was. She'd been studying, and she'd fallen asleep. Even though sun splayed over the beanbag chair where Amy was curled up in the corner of her dorm room, she felt chilled. She always felt chilled after that dream. But first, this video is sponsored by the Elementia Studios Patreon. On there, for only $1, you can support me and also get all sorts of cool content like early videos, bonus content, exclusive behind-the-scenes stuff, basically whatever I throw onto there. If you feel like supporting the channel for only $1 a month, check it out. The link will be in the description. Amy hugged herself, rubbing her arms to try and warm up. Face it, she thought, you're not going to be able to read today. She never could read on this day. This sunny day in mid-May might not have been a day that meant anything to anyone else, but to Amy, this day had great meaning, just not great as in good. Amy actually hated this date, and it never passed without her being aware of it, from the moment she got up in the morning to the moment she finally fell asleep at night, which generally didn't happen until she'd done a lot of staring at the ceiling and even more tossing and turning. Amy sighed and dropped her book. What was she thinking, trying to read a book on the future of corporate economics on a day like today? Stretching her legs, Amy stood and wandered over to the window that looked out over the quad below. She twirled a few strands of her long hair, watching a couple guys she knew play frisbee. They were good. The disc flew low and straight over the top of a couple dozen sun worshippers and last-minute studiers, and it never hit anyone. Amy smiled and took a deep breath. This would be the last week she'd have this view. Graduation was in a week, and 3 weeks after that, she'd be starting the new job she already had lined up. Before she did that, though, she was going to have to do something she'd been thinking about for a long time. There was no doubt in her mind now. She had to do it, if she ever wanted to be free from her past. She'd carried this weight around for 10 years. That was long enough. Turning away from the window, Amy walked over to her neatly made bed. She sat and stared at the bare mattress on the other side of the room. Amy's roommate had finished exams the previous day, and she'd already packed up and gone home. Her boyfriend was back home, so she'd planned to spend the week with him, and then return for commencement. Amy didn't have a boyfriend at home, or here at college for that matter, and she had 2 more exams still to take. She just hoped she might concentrate well enough not to screw up her grade point average, but Mary Jo might make that impossible. Mary Jo. Did anyone else ever think about the frizzy-haired 11-year-old who'd always thought rules were meant to be broken? Probably not. Okay, so we've had a time skip here, and it appears that Mary Jo, something happened to her, and there's been a time skip. We're now 10 years later, and something happened on this day to Mary Jo, presumably in the hiding maze, presumably when Amy left, presumably it's the man who did it, and it seems like Amy is probably going to go back to the maze. That's a really cool concept, actually. I was a bit lukewarm on this story so far, but once we got to that point where there's this time skip, which isn't something any of these stories have really done so far, I don't think, that's pretty interesting, actually. Like, I'm assuming she's going to go back to the hide-and-seek maze, whatever, now, 10 years later, try and find out what happened to Mary Jo, maybe. I don't know, I'm guessing, because I haven't read any farther yet. But that sounds like it could be really cool. Maybe she'll come across Mary Jo's body or something, I don't know. Very interesting, actually. I wonder if this guy is supposed to be William Afton, or if that's, I doubt, just a complete coincidence, but like a William Afton parallel or something. I don't know. We'll find out. This is interesting. So far my favorite story in the book, actually. I can't wait to read more. Thank you guys for listening. I will do that soon. Bye-bye.